Are you ready to shake up your approach to your love life? Today, we have a special guest, Gregory Diehl, here with us, and he challenges us to rethink our assumptions about relationships and personal growth. So, today, we're going to explore his ideas from his book, The Romantic Ideal, and how it can help us become better partners and spouses. Hey parents, welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. Do you want to raise your kids better and have a stronger marriage? Are you up late at night researching marriage and parenting tools and self-care tips? Do you start each day hoping for deeper connections and less chaos, but it ends with family arguments and going 12 different directions again? My name's Kendra, wife, mom, therapist, and growth enthusiast. It wasn't until I discovered how to fulfill my unmet needs that I was finally able to show up as my best self as a spouse and parent. I realized that by meeting my needs, I could more fully meet the needs of my family with more energy and less resentment. In this podcast, I teach parents skills like boundary setting, prioritizing personal needs, communication, and claiming ownership. Just like my clients, you'll be shocked by the improvement in your marriage, parenting, and personal life when you focus on fulfilling your important unmet needs. Ready to prioritize yourself so you can quit mentally throat punching people? Then grab those earbuds and head outside, and let's rock and talk. Welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. Today we have a special guest, Gregory Diehl, with us, and he is going to talk to us a little bit about relationships, and I'm excited to have him on the show today. He is an educator who inspires people to think differently about life's important questions and encourages self-awareness and confident self-expression. He actually lives in Armenia right now and runs a nonprofit retreat center that promotes unconventional learning and personal growth. So his work helps people break free from societal norms and explore new ways of thinking. So thanks for coming on the show, Gregory. We're happy to have you.
Yeah, and that's really what my book is about too. Unconventional ways of thinking about important issues. Those are all the books here, right?
I was actually curious about that. So is this your first book that you've written, The Romantic Ideal?
It's my first book about romance and relationships, but that's actually my seventh book overall. All of them are nonfiction, and they're all addressing various aspects of self-actualization and expression.
That's amazing. Yeah, I cannot wait to get to that stage where I get to write more. I just haven't quite gotten there yet, and I love picking people's brains that have been on that journey themselves. Did you always know you wanted to write books?
No, I didn't even realize it would be feasible until I stumbled into self-publishing, and I realized that you didn't have to go through the very, very arduous task of finding a traditional publisher. Once then I realized that I could put anything out there that I wrote. I just became about understanding the standards that are expected from a professionally published and edited and produced book. And so I had to figure out how to meet all those standards.
And do you have a favorite book that you've written?
I suppose you could rank them in terms of importance. The fifth book I wrote was called Everyone is an Entrepreneur, which was actually about Armenia and my experiences here and why people in a post-Soviet culture often fail to understand the basics of economics and entrepreneurship. It's a whole paradigm shift here, which you see a lot if you go to many different parts of the world. But the whole book is about what can we do to help these people understand really basic concepts that would significantly improve their quality of life. Things that seem obvious to us in the West that you just know by default growing up in America, and you take them for granted because it's like you've gone back in time to a society that never invented the wheel or something, and you're trying to explain to them there's a much better way to think about these things and do these things. And it's just not part of their cultural DNA. It's been squashed out of them or something, and you're trying to slowly plant those seeds. So that's what that book is about. I would say, I don't know if it's my favorite, but I would say on a global perspective, that's probably the most important subject written about.
That's amazing. And then this latest one is about the romantic ideal. And I want to pick your brain about that in just a minute. But before we jump into that, can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing now? Like I mentioned in your intro biography, just about this retreat center. It's a retreat center. Is that what it is?
Yeah. That's what we're calling it. It's a work in progress. We've been taking international volunteers, of which we've probably had about 100 so far that have been helping develop the place physically, educationally, artistically. Basically, 5 years ago, I retired from traveling around the world to a village in Armenia that invited me to come live here because they claimed they were interested in developing the village economically, culturally, all these things that I talk about, write books about. And most of that turned out not to be true. But once I already had the house and was ingrained here, I thought the best thing I could do would be to turn it into a place where people have the opportunity to learn things and develop in ways as people that they don't really get to do in this society for various culture related reasons. And that's had a pretty positive reception from a lot of people here and a very negative one. Some people have sent us death threats and think we're foreign invaders trying to threaten them in some way. But we've been interviewed many times on local news, and it's an interesting initiative. It's not at all what I planned when I first came here, but it's one application of my values, and it's going to give me plenty of things to write about probably the rest of my life.
I can imagine you are going to have a lot of major takeaways from that. I don't know that I've had anyone else share a story quite like that of their past and what they're doing. We're ending up, obviously, in a tiny village in Armenia. If you're okay with it, why don't we talk about your book for a little bit? So, what inspired you to write The Romantic Ideal? And what do you want readers to take away from that?
Okay, so to answer that question, you have to understand what I mean by that. I use the term romantic idealism, romantic idealists. The romantic ideal is the title of the book, which basically means this guy who's dedicated to fulfilling his ideal version. A romantic relationship, no matter how many times he gets his heart broken, which can either be seen as a very positive or a very negative thing, depending on the framing, like that this poor fool's never going to learn, or wow, that's so inspiring that he's so dedicated no matter what hardships he faces, doing what he knows is right. The book is partially meant to give people who are inclined and oriented this way permission to be this way, because many of them learn to think that there's something wrong with them for having these kinds of ideals, because most of the world isn't like this. And most of our culture and our stories don't really encourage this way of thinking. And as I've learned in many cultures around the world, it's even violently opposed in many ways. I even include story of a woman I tried to marry whose parents would never approve of me because I was from a different race and a different culture. And she was not self-determined enough to overcome that. That she had no autonomy and volition of her own, that she couldn't say, Mom and Dad, I love him. I'm going to do what I want because I know it's right. And that is the kind of love story we like to tell. Like love overcoming all obstacles and odds and reshaping the society around them because it's the right thing to do. And the reason it's the right thing to do is because it's an aspect of our fullest possible self-expression. If you are this kind of person, then I would make the argument that you owe it to yourself to do everything in your power to fulfill your values to the highest possible domain. Just as I would say so in any other domain, if you were a musically oriented person, learn to play the piano and play it for the rest of your life because that's who you're supposed to be, right? And if you were passionate about anything else, I'd say pursue that as much as humanly possible. If you're a romantically oriented person, that's what this book is about. What is it like to be such a person, particularly from a masculine perspective? Because I've never been a woman and I'm not very femininely oriented. But I do try to be fair and balance this out with trying to have some understanding of what it must be like to be a woman. And I do have a forward written by a woman who brings a nice feminine counterbalance to my approach. And I certainly don't claim to be speaking from some kind of objective, universal, enlightened perspective for all people. It's a very personal book. Certainly, I'm very much speaking from my perspective, but I'm very transparent about that too. And I think that's where a lot of the value book comes into it. It's a very honest book.
So, did this all come about because of your insights and everything that happened when you proposed to this girl and the lessons learned from that?
No, it's my life. I think that's one particularly interesting insight in it. And it's like the culmination of everything because certainly that experience forced me to reach certain conclusions that are unsettling to think about, but really unavoidable once you've been through certain kinds of experiences. Men like me will beat themselves up over and over again, trying to figure out why a relationship didn't work. Like we will sit there and obsess and hyperanalyze. Okay, can I go over every little mistake I might have made? How could I have done those things better? And would that have made any difference if I'd been the perfect boyfriend from day one? I don't understand why, and on paper, it seemed like we were so perfect and things started out so strong. So why didn't this work? It doesn't make any sense. And of course, I can only change my own behavior. So I'm just sitting there thinking, like, what did I do wrong? This relationship that should have worked didn't. And when you reach a situation like that, there's no way you can avoid the conclusion that this is not my fault. There is nothing I could have done about this situation, nothing I could have said. If I'd been the most romantic guy in the world and showered her with love and flowers and attention, she still would have been the person she is in the cultural setting she's in with her underdeveloped autonomy, essentially. And my mistake, if I made one, was simply that I did not recognize that's the kind of person I was bonding with. And so at a certain point, that's the conclusion you have to reach, which might sound cocky. Like, I never do anything wrong. I never make any mistakes. I'm the perfect boyfriend, right? Of course, we all make mistakes, right? But are they deal breaking mistakes, or are they simply things to work on with your partner and figure out how better to relate to each other, right? And if you can honestly self-assess and say, no, I did not torpedo this relationship, or there's nothing I could have done to avoid this outcome, then you realize maybe the problem isn't with you. Maybe the problem is with the state of the world, which is a much bigger enemy to be facing. And that's also kind of part of the book because it's really not a relationship advice book in most senses. It's not like, here's how to have a great, fulfilling relationship. I have had many great, fulfilling relationships. I've also had the opposite many times. And I share those stories to the extent that I think it's interesting and informative. But it's really not like, here's how to find your soulmate and have a wonderful, fulfilling relationship. It's more like just how do you live with the burdens of being this kind of person, especially when your romantic ambitions do not work out.
So when there's failures, sometimes I don't like to call them failures, but when things don't go the way that you anticipate, this could also help you. Is that right?
The last chapter is called Returning to the Void, which is a reference, I think, to really what it's like to be a masculine person cut off from the rest of the world. You feel like you live your life in a void, not really attached to physical reality and beauty and emotion and sensation. And that's why we're so attracted to feminine women, because they connect us to the world and make us feel those things. And so, what do you do when you don't have that beautiful, loving, romantic, feminine influence in your life that you know you so desperately need as the kind of person you are? How do you persist in this masculine detached void, right?
That goes into what I was curious if you could explain to listeners, because you did talk about in this book about the masculine and feminine energies in romance. For people that don't really understand what that means, can you tie that in for us and help us understand what it is you're talking about there?
Yeah. For some reason, this has become a contentious topic in modern times among some people. I have received some very interesting feedback as I was writing the book because I showed it to a lot of people, to beta readers whose opinions I trusted. Am I explaining things clearly? What do you think of the book? What do I need more of or less of? Some people loved it, both men and women, and some people thought, like, how dare you write this kind of book? And I was trying to figure out, what have I said that is so offensive here? Like, certainly there are parts of the book that are critical of both men and women in different contexts, but I don't think anything that's particularly unfair or even anything particularly original. I'm not the first person to criticize these kinds of behaviors. So is that what they're so offended by? But no, really, it was just right from the beginning, just the very idea that I acknowledged that men and women are categorically different. And being a man is different than being a woman. The
Absolutely.
masculine experience is different than the feminine. Well, like, just that idea was enough to offend a lot of people and to really promote that and say, actually, this can be a good thing. If you're mature and healthy and you really embody who you really are and you find a complementary partner who really embodies who they are. That's not the message a lot of people wanted to hear. It's almost like they want to hear the opposite. No, we need to remove these distinctions and everybody should be the same. And this just creates strife and conflict and competition and the societal pressures to act a certain way. And yeah, all of that is true. And I definitely speak out against that. Just because being feminine is different than being masculine doesn't mean that if you're a woman, you should cook and clean all day and be forced into these particular social gender roles. And same thing for men. It's about you finding the best way to embody that side of yourself in
Right.
whatever conditions you have to be in, right?
And
And,
celebrating that, and that there is a difference. I love that you're speaking to that. Good.
and of course, romantically speaking, we tend to be attracted to the person who is the complementary opposite of us. But if you're 90% masculine and 10% feminine, you'll probably be attracted to someone who's 90% feminine and 10% masculine. And these things are not sharply divided because there are many domains of life where you can feel more feminine or more masculine. I often use the example that, like with children, I can have a very nurturing, soft, gentle, what we would think of it as a mothering kind of side. Yet in most other aspects of my life, I'm quite masculine and hard and detached and focused and analytical and all these other things that we would consider masculine. And that's not threatening to my masculinity at all. In fact, it's the opposite. It's like saying I'm so confident in my masculinity that I can be feminine when it's appropriate to be and still 100% feel like a manly man, right?
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
and the opposite with women, that if when it's appropriate, if you feel masculine in a particular way, you shouldn't have to be self-conscious about that as long as you're confident in your femininity and the rest of who you are. And that can also be really attractive because it shows you're versatile, you're flexible, you're adaptable, you're not just stuck in one narrow way of being.
I love that you speak to that. I know that a lot of people learn with stories, and you shared a little bit about that past relationship, but is there another personal story or experience that maybe shaped your views on romance or love or some of these points you're speaking to when it comes to your book?
I give a lot of both positive and negative examples in the book because I'm trying to be honest and balanced. It's about idealism, of course, but it's also about confronting realism, the reality of the world we live in. And I talk about getting cheated on. That was one of the most traumatic, horrible, painful experiences of my life with a girl that I was in love with and dated for a couple of years. And a lot of those things, of course, didn't end up in beautiful, successful, romantically monogamous relationships because I'm still not married. But the lessons learned from that were the kind of thing that make it possible for me to be the kind of person who ultimately ends up with what I would call a soulmate, like the one woman I would spend the rest of my life with, gladly, willingly choosing every single day. Could I have become that kind of person if I hadn't gone through all these exploratory experiences first? Probably not. Is that the same for everyone, or is that just the kind of person I am? I don't know. I'll leave that up to the reader, but maybe they can still learn something from my experiences.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. And just in closing, do you mind what advice would you give to someone looking to cultivate those deeper connections in their romantic life based on the experiences that you've had or what you speak to in this book that might help them if what you're saying is really resonating with them in their experiences?
I'm not going to ever try to tell anyone what kind of person they are or should be, but if you are this kind of person, you probably already know, or you probably suspected your whole life. But being this kind of person is, and recognizing it is really just half the battle. The rest of it is learning how to do this in a mature and responsible and healthy way. And that requires you to be a mature person in all areas of your life. If you're struggling with emotional insecurities and baggage from the past or issues with your parents, all of that is going to come up and be magnified 100 times over when you try to bond with someone else who might also be dealing with their own stuff. And so that's not saying everybody has to be a little enlightened Buddha before they can date someone, because that just seems impractical, first of all. But rather that maybe the journey of really deeply bonding with someone is that you do that together, like you're mirrors for each other and you hold each other accountable and you help each other become the best version of yourself that you can be because you see that potential in each other. You're both totally honestly dedicated to that.
Absolutely. I appreciate the different insights that you have and telling us more about your book. And so, again, that book is The Romantic Ideal, and you can check that out. Where can they find that book?
It's on Amazon and most other online retailers. If you want to learn more about me or my other books, you can also go to my website, which is just my name, gregorydiehl.net. Diehl is spelled Diehl.
And we will put in the show notes where we can find you and your links and all of those things as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show and teaching us a little bit more about relationships, that romantic ideal, and different things that we can do to take our lives to the next level in this way. So I appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you having me.
Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, chances are someone else would too. Would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who's looking for greater family fulfillment? And while you're sharing, tell me what you think about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It refuels me when I hear this podcast is helping you. No matter what your house or your hair looks like, I'll meet you back here every Monday and Thursday morning for more episodes. Until then.